I spent 31 years in insurance, and if there's one thing that job teaches you, it's how to read risk. You learn to look past what people say and pay attention to what they don't. You learn that a crack in the foundation doesn't appear overnight. It starts small. A hairline fracture you can miss if you're not paying attention, or if you don't want to see it. I didn't want to see it. My name is Douglas. Wait, no. Let me start over the right way. I'm 64 years old. I retired 2 years ago from a regional insurance firm in Columbus, Ohio, where I spent 3 decades assessing risk for other people's lives while apparently ignoring every warning sign in my own. I have a daughter, I have a son-in-law, and until 8 months ago I had a wife of 38 years. I also had a heart. That's the one that almost killed me. My wife's name is Cecile. We met in 1986 at a church potluck in Westerville when she handed me a plate of her mother's green bean casserole and told me it was the best thing I'd ever eat. She wasn't wrong about the casserole. She was, it turned out, wrong about a lot of other things. We built a good life. Nothing flashy. I drove a 10-year-old Silverado until the transmission gave out, and Cecile clipped coupons long after we stopped needing to. We paid off the house in 2009. We put our daughter through Ohio State without a single student loan. When our daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's all she is to me now, a title, not a name I want to say out loud. When she graduated and told us she was marrying a man named Prescott, we welcomed him into the family. I should have read the risk assessment on that one more carefully. Prescott came from money, or at least he talked like he did. He had that particular kind of confidence that people from certain zip codes develop, the kind that looks like competence from a distance and reveals itself as entitlement up close. He worked in consulting, which meant he billed a lot of hours and produced very little I could point to. My daughter thought he was brilliant. Cecile thought he was. I thought he had soft hands for a man who claimed to have built things, but I kept my mouth shut because that's what fathers do. What I didn't keep track of, what I should have, was the slow, almost imperceptible way things began to shift after the wedding. It started with small asks. Could we help with the down payment on their condo? Of course. Could I co-sign on a car loan for Prescott? Because he was between contracts. I did it. Could Cecile watch their dog for 3 weeks while they took a trip to Portugal? She did. Could I look over Prescott's business proposal and maybe introduce him to a few of my contacts at the firm? I made the calls. Every time I said yes, the next ask came faster and a little larger. And every time I tried to slow things down gently, carefully, the way you approach a load-bearing wall you're not sure about. Cecile would put her hand on my arm and say, "They're just getting started, Ray." We were young once too. My name is Ray, by the way. Raymond Aldous Kuster. But everyone calls me Ray. I was 62 the night my heart gave out. It was a Friday in March. Late March. That particular Ohio cold that tricks you into thinking spring is close and then reminds you it isn't. I'd been feeling off for a couple of weeks, tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, a tightness in my chest I kept dismissing as stress. I had a follow-up scheduled with my cardiologist for the following Tuesday. I told myself I just needed to make it to Tuesday. That Friday, Prescott turned 40. He and my daughter had been planning the party for 3 months. Not a dinner, not a small gathering. A catered event at a rented venue in Dublin, a suburb north of Columbus where the houses have 3-car garages and the restaurants don't put prices on the lunch menu. 120 guests, an open bar, a DJ, a photo booth with custom props. Cecile and I were invited, of course. I'd written the check for the deposit when Prescott mentioned the venue was a little over their budget right now. $1,100. I didn't ask for it back. I skipped the party that night, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't feel well. I told Cecile to go without me, that I'd be fine, that I'd heat up the leftover soup and watch the game and be in bed by 9. She kissed me on the cheek and told me not to wait up. Around 8:15, I stood up from the couch to let the dog out, and the world went sideways. The pain wasn't what I expected. People describe a heart attack like a fist to the chest, and mine felt more like something was being wrung out, like someone had reached in and was slowly twisting. My left arm went numb to the fingertips. I made it to the kitchen counter and held on. I tried to call Cecile. She didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. I called my daughter. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called Cecile one more time, and this time she picked up. I could hear the music behind her voice, the bass thud of whatever the DJ was playing, the crowd noise, someone laughing nearby. "Ray, I can't really hear you. Sessile. I said, "Herm's the way you say something you need someone to hold on to. I think I'm having a heart attack. I need you to come home." There was a pause. I heard her move somewhere quieter. "Are you sure? You've been anxious lately," the doctor said. "Cecil, please call 911 and come home." She called 911. She stayed at the party. The paramedics got there in 7 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave the entire time I was on the kitchen floor with the dog sitting next to me, her chin on my knee, which is the most loyalty I received that night from any living creature in my family. The ER doctor was a young woman named Dr. Okafor, who had the kind of calm in her voice that either means everything is fine or nothing is fine, and she's been trained not to let you know the difference. She told me I'd had a significant cardiac event. She told me they were stabilizing me and that they'd need to perform a procedure. She told me I should call my family. I told her my family was at a party. She picked up the phone herself and called Cecile's cell. I watched her face while she spoke. I watched it go professionally neutral in the way faces go when they're choosing not to show you what they just heard. She hung up and said, "Your wife says she'll be there in the morning. She asked that we not call this number again tonight, unless it becomes absolutely necessary." I want you to understand how quiet the room was when she said that. Just the machines, just the beeping, just the particular hum of a hospital at night when everyone on the other side of those walls is asleep or trying to be. "Okay," I said. I don't know why I said okay. There wasn't anything okay about it. My daughter didn't come either. I found out later she'd turned her phone face down on the table when it rang, because the speeches were starting and she didn't want to be rude. Prescott, I was told, gave a very moving toast. They kept me for 4 days. Cecile came the next morning around 10, with a coffee from Starbucks and the particular expression of someone who has been told they behaved badly and has decided to preempt the conversation by acting normal. She asked how I was feeling. She said the party had been wonderful. She said Prescott had asked about me. I lay there with tubes in my arm and monitors on my chest, and I looked at my wife of 38 years and I thought about risk. I thought about what it means to underwrite something, to assess it, study it, put your name behind it and say, "I believe in this. I believe this is worth protecting." I thought about all the years I'd looked at Cecile and thought, this is solid. This is real. This is the one thing I don't need to worry about. I thought about how wrong I'd been. My daughter came on day 2. She brought flowers. Grocery store flowers, the kind wrapped in cellophane, and she told me I'd scared her. She sat by my bed for 40 minutes and spent most of it on her phone. When she left, she hugged me and said, "You have to take better care of yourself, Dad." I almost laughed. Prescott came on day 3 briefly on his way to somewhere else. He shook my hand and told me I had good color. He asked, while he was there, whether I'd had a chance to look over the refinancing paperwork he'd sent me in February, the one where I'd agreed to be a guarantor on a second loan against their property. I told him I hadn't signed it yet. He smiled and said, "No rush." That was the moment. I can tell you exactly what it felt like. Not anger, not sadness. Just a particular kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop pretending you don't see what you see. Like stepping back from a wall you've been too close to and suddenly understanding the whole structure. The whole structure was rotten. I called my attorney from the hospital on day 4. His name is Frank. I've known him for 22 years, since he handled the closing on our first house. He's a careful man, methodical, the kind who reads every line of every document twice and doesn't speak until he's finished thinking. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is why I've trusted him for 2 decades. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ray, I want you to do one thing before you do anything else." "What's that?" "Get better. And don't sign anything." I went home after 4 days to a house that felt like a stage set. Cecile made soup. My daughter called twice that week. Prescott sent a text saying he was glad I was feeling better and asking about the refinancing paperwork with a little thumbs-up emoji at the end, which I found both offensive and somehow perfectly on brand. I spent the next 6 weeks recovering. I walked the neighborhood twice a day per the cardiologist's orders. I lost 12 pounds without trying. I read. I sat on the back porch in the mornings with the dog and the coffee, and I thought carefully about the next step of my life. I talked to Frank twice a week. I reached out quietly to a financial advisor I'd worked with at the firm. A sharp woman named Gloria who didn't ask unnecessary questions and moved quickly when asked. I had my accounts reviewed. I made a list of everything I owned outright, everything tied to Cecile, everything co-signed, every loan I'd guaranteed for Prescott. The list was longer than I'd realized. Over the years, without ever sitting down and accounting for it all at once, I had extended roughly $340,000 worth of financial support to my daughter and son-in-law. Some of it as gifts, some as loans that had never been repaid and never would be, some as guarantees and co-signatures, and the equity line on our home, which I'd agreed to increase 2 years ago at Cecile's request, had a balance of $80,000, almost all of which had gone toward a renovation on my daughter's house. Prescott's consulting business had failed, quietly, undramatically, the way a tire goes flat on a parked car. It just wasn't there anymore. He was working something new, he said. Something in real estate. I spent 3 weeks with Frank and Gloria putting together what Frank called a restructuring. The word made me feel steadier. It sounded like what it was. Not destruction, but rebuilding something on a proper foundation. The first thing I did was change the beneficiary designations on my life insurance policies. I had two, one through the firm, grandfathered in from before my retirement, and one private policy I'd held since 1994. Both named Cecile as primary and my daughter as contingent. I updated both to a charitable trust Frank helped me establish. The second thing, I stopped being a guarantor. Frank sent letters on my behalf formally withdrawing from any loan agreements that legally permitted withdrawal. For the ones that didn't, we notified the lenders that I would not be renewing my guarantee upon maturity. The third, I removed my name from the equity line and transferred my share of the home to a separate legal entity. Something Frank had suggested, structured carefully and entirely within the law, which protected my interest while removing Cecile's ability to draw further against it unilaterally. The fourth, I revised my will. I didn't disinherit anyone. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a cruel man. But I restructured distributions to reflect the reality of what had already been given, what had been taken. The accounting was simple when you looked at it honestly. I also hired a private investigator. Not for anything dramatic. I want to be clear about that too. I hired him because Prescott's new real estate venture involved a property in my daughter's name, and Frank wanted to understand the full picture before I signed off on anything further. What the investigator found was straightforward and not surprising. Prescott had 2 active lawsuits from previous investors. Nothing criminal, but the kind of civil record that a reasonable person conducting due diligence would want to know about. The kind of record I should have looked for a long time ago. I told Cecile on a Tuesday evening in June. We were at the kitchen table after dinner, which is where we'd had every significant conversation of our marriage. The dog was under the table with her chin on my foot. I had a folder in front of me that I didn't open because I didn't need it. I knew everything in it. I told her what I'd done, calmly, specifically, without anger, because I'd spent 6 weeks processing the anger alone on my morning walks and I was done with it. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said, "You did all of this without telling me?" "Yes," I said, "the same way you decided not to come to the hospital." She said that wasn't fair. She said I hadn't sounded that serious on the phone. She said the party had already been paid for and there were guests and she hadn't wanted to make a scene. She said a lot of things that were technically sentences but didn't add up to anything that made sense to me. I listened to all of it. Then I told her I wanted a separation, that I'd spoken to Frank about it, that I wasn't doing it to punish her. I said this carefully and I meant it, but because I had spent 38 years assessing risk for a living, and I had finally done an honest assessment of this one, and the numbers didn't work. She cried. I handed her a box of tissues from the counter. The dog got up and went to her, because the dog is a better person than most people I know. I slept in the guest room that night and for many nights after. My daughter called me 3 days later. She was upset. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was punishing her for one night, when I hadn't even died. She said I needed to think about what I was doing to the family. I listened. Then I asked her one question. When the hospital called you, what were you doing? Silence. You said the speeches were starting and you didn't want to be rude. More silence. I've thought about that a lot, I said. I've thought about what it must have felt like to look down at that phone, see the hospital calling, and put it face down on the table because you didn't want to interrupt a toast. I've thought about what that decision tells me. Not about who you were on one bad night, but about who you've become and what you actually think of me. She started to cry. I told her I loved her. I told her that was not in question and would never be. But I also told her that love doesn't mean unlimited access to someone's money and unconditional tolerance for being treated like an afterthought. I told her what I'd changed in my will and why. I told her about Prescott's civil record. I told her she deserved to know the truth about the man she'd married, and that I should have told her sooner, and that was the one failure in all of this that I accepted as mine. She hung up without saying goodbye. She called back 4 hours later and talked for a long time. The separation became a divorce. Cecile hired an attorney. Frank managed our side. It was not pleasant, but it was civil, which was the most I could ask for. The house was sold in September. I took my half and bought a smaller place in Bexley, a 2-bedroom brick bungalow on a quiet street with a big backyard for the dog, who came with me without discussion because we both knew who she belonged to. Prescott's real estate venture collapsed in October. I heard about it from my daughter, who called me not to blame me but to tell me she'd found a credit card statement she hadn't known about. $23,000 in charges from the past 8 months on an account in her name that Prescott had opened without her full awareness. I didn't say I told you so. I said, "What do you need?" She told me. I helped where I could, in ways that were specific and bounded and not open-ended. Frank drew up the paperwork for a structured loan. Real paperwork, repayment terms, everything on the table, and in writing she signed it. That was something. She's in the process of filing for divorce. I won't say how that sits with me, because it's complicated in ways I don't have clean words for. I'm glad she sees it. I wish she'd seen it sooner. I wish I had. I'm 64 years old. I walk 2 miles every morning, regardless of the weather. My cardiologist says my numbers are the best they've been in 5 years, which she finds remarkable and I find logical. Stress, it turns out, is genuinely bad for your heart, and I have a great deal less of it than I used to. I eat better. I sleep 8 hours. I sit on the back porch in the mornings with the dog and the coffee, and I watch the light come up over the fence, and I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I feel like the foundation is solid. I spent 31 years reading risk for other people, assessing what was real, what was facade, what would hold, and what would eventually give. I was good at it. I was good at it because I paid attention, because I didn't let what I wanted to be true interfere with what actually was. I stopped doing that at home. For years I stopped doing that, because it's harder to be honest about the things you love, and because the habit of hope is a difficult one to break. But the machines are beeping, or they aren't. The foundation holds, or it doesn't. You can look away, but the crack doesn't close itself while you're not watching. I know that now in a different way than I did before. I know it in my chest, where the scar tissue is still there a little, if you know how to read it. And I do. I know exactly how to read it.